If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars, could be a 50 or 100%, because we don't want their cars.
Critical. I love the idea or the aspiration of a Canadian car.
In early 2025, Donald Trump stood at a podium and declared, "Every car sold in America should be built in America." He didn't just say it, he backed it with action. First came the steel tariffs, then aluminum, then a 25% levy on finished vehicles imported from Canada. The message was loud and clear. Washington was done tolerating cross-border production. But this wasn't just about policy, it was about pressure. And now, the consequences are catching up, not just for Canada, but for US automakers themselves. The Trump administration called it a strategic reset. But for many manufacturers, it felt like economic whiplash. Companies had spent decades building integrated supply chains across the border. Overnight, those links became liabilities. The modern North American car isn't built in one place. It's assembled across the border, piece by piece, in a choreography refined over decades. A piston might start as aluminum mined in Quebec, molded in Ontario, finished in Detroit, then installed in an engine back in Windsor. By the time it ends up in a vehicle, it has crossed the US-Canada border 5 or 6 times. This isn't inefficiency, it's specialization. Canada focuses on castings, stampings, and high-volume parts. The US handles final assembly electronics and software. For decades, this partnership allowed Ford, GM, and Stellantis to optimize costs, reduce delays, and scale production. This binational dance was made possible by policy certainty, starting with the 1965 Auto Pact, then NAFTA, and now USMCA. Disrupting it isn't just costly. It risks undoing the very system that kept Detroit competitive in a global market. That balance is now under siege.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. We put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars.
Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian vehicles, combined with a 50% tariff on Canadian steel, has upended that equation. Since June 2025, Ford and Stellantis have paused production lines in Ontario, citing cost spikes and declining demand. Stellantis' Windsor plant now operates in staggered shifts. General Motors, meanwhile, ramped up production of trucks in Fort Wayne, Indiana, diverting output from Oshawa. These are not isolated moves. The U.S. auto industry is bleeding. Stellantis alone reported up to $5 billion in tariff-related losses last quarter, according to internal earnings reviewed by Bloomberg. Ford estimated similar figures. The Canadian auto parts industry, which supplies roughly half its output to U.S. plants, is now watching its order books dry up. And beyond just steel and cars, Trump's trade pressure has spread to tooling and molds, specialized manufacturing sectors dominated by Canadian firms. Several suppliers in Ontario say they've lost long-term contracts from U.S. buyers, who fear uncertainty more than price. Meanwhile, American automakers are seeing ripple effects in labor relations. UAW leaders in Michigan have warned that rapid shifts in production strategy, driven by political uncertainty, could derail recent labor deals and plant modernization plans. And that's just the beginning.
President Trump actually gave Canada a gift. It's really the first time that Canada or Canadians are looking back and saying, how did we allow ourselves to get into the vulnerable position that we are in?
Trump didn't need to implement a 100% tariff. He simply had to float the threat. That alone was enough to freeze Canadian investment, disrupt binational logistics, and trigger panic in boardrooms. But here's the catch. As automakers pull away from Canada, they're not necessarily building more in America. They're scaling down. They're rerouting to Mexico, or just not reinvesting at all. And as Canada threatens retaliation by July 21st, potentially targeting American auto exports, Detroit now risks losing its second-largest foreign market. Trump may have scored a political win, but he's also shaken the foundations of a $100 billion ecosystem. One where the U.S. can't truly win if its closest partner collapses.
You also have to ask, is Canada still buying those cars?
We buy about 1.8 million vehicles a year. They might lose a market, or their market of 1.8 million vehicles drops because maybe we put tariffs on US-made vehicles.
When President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50% in mid-2025, the rhetoric was familiar. Protect American jobs, punish unfair trade. But somewhere between the press releases and the political bravado, the impact on everyday people got lost. Because while factories adjust and politicians posture, consumers are the ones paying the price, literally. On average, U.S. families are now spending an estimated $1,300 more per year on cars and appliances, according to a June report by the Center for Automotive Research. And across the border, Canadians are responding, not with anger, but with silence. They're walking away from U.S.-made vehicles. Dealerships in Ontario and Quebec have reported up to a 30% drop in sales of U.S. brands since April. Some are shifting floor space toward Korean and European models, while others say customers are holding off until the tariffs go away, if they ever do.
And that tariff doubled to 50%. The issue is that 91% of Canadian steel exports go to the United States. Nearly 1,000 steel jobs have been lost so far.
Canada's steel sector is the first casualty. With 91% of its exports heading to the U.S., the 50% tariff has caused nearly 1,000 job losses so far, according to the Canadian Steel Producers Association. More could come in the weeks ahead, with towns like Sault Ste. Marie bracing for what one mayor called post-industrial collapse. Canada hasn't retaliated, yet. Prime Minister Mark Carney has set a July 21st deadline. If no trade deal is reached, counter tariffs on U.S. exports could begin. In the meantime, Canada is trying to shield itself. Federal procurement contracts now require domestic steel. Quotas have been imposed on cheap imports from non-free trade agreement countries. But none of it is enough to restore stability. Catherine Cobden, president of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, has warned that blast furnaces can't just pause production. Once they shut down, many never restart. Thousands more jobs are now on the line, with little time left before irreversible damage.
And we've got this tariff on finished auto goods. And if the vehicles made in Canada cost 25% more to American consumers.
In April alone, Canadian vehicle exports to the U.S. dropped by nearly 23%, driven by Trump's 25% auto tariff. Buyers in both countries are hesitant. U.S. prices are up, Canadian assembly plants are down, and dealers from Toronto to Buffalo are left guessing which model will be canceled next. For decades, Canadians bought over 1.8 million U.S. vehicles annually. That number is shrinking fast. Carney's government has even floated the idea of retaliatory tariffs or lifting import duties on Chinese cars, a signal that U.S. brands may no longer be the default choice. In the U.S., meanwhile, uncertainty has halted forward planning. Automakers are slashing production forecasts. Customers are delaying purchases. And despite short-term sales boosts at Ford and Hyundai in May, experts warn demand is being pulled forward, not grown. Some analysts worry that these trade disruptions are breaking trust, not just between nations, but between consumers and the companies they rely on. If a customer can't be sure whether their vehicle will be serviced, warrantied, or supported next year, they may not buy at all.
If you build here, you have no tariffs whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think our country is going to be flooded with jobs for everybody.
Could be done, but it would take years, if not decades, to get the supply chain back on track.
Trump promised a rebirth of American manufacturing, but in practice, he's delivered something else: chaos across North America's most integrated supply chain. His tariff threats may look strong on paper, but on the ground, they've created confusion, delays, and rising costs, all of it shouldered by workers and consumers. This isn't just a trade war, it's a confidence crisis. And for millions of families deciding whether to buy a new car, the message from Washington is anything but reassuring. Sometimes the most expensive thing in politics is unpredictability. And right now, it's showing up in driveways, one payment at a time.
Last night I had a good conversation with President Trump, and we agreed to recommence our negotiations with a view to the 21st of July deadline that we had agreed in Kananaskis.
So what can we expect from the Trump administration now that talks with Canada are back on?
Canada blinked, and Trump seized the moment. Just hours before a controversial digital tax was set to take effect, Prime Minister Mark Carney called President Trump and surrendered. Canada scrapped a law worth 7 billion Canadian dollars, hoping to reopen trade talks that Trump had abruptly shut down just days earlier. It worked. Talks resumed. Trump got everything he wanted without giving an inch. But he's not finished. He's pressing for more. And this time, the price could be even higher. How far will Trump push? And how much more can Canada afford to give?
Here, Canada seemingly has played this card at that point in time. And so was it withdrawn out of goodwill? And is it going to get us more than just talks restarting?
Trump got exactly what he wanted without offering anything in return. The tax is gone. The 301 investigation? Canceled. Threatened tariffs? Suspended, for now. But Canada didn't win any tariff relief. As of June 30th, the U.S. maintains elevated tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos, as high as 50% in some categories since March 2025. This follows a pattern. In recent trade talks with the UK, Trump agreed to resume dialogue but didn't remove tariffs. He prefers temporary calm, not permanent settlement. In his own words, he's a tariff guy. That means the US-Canada talks, even now, are happening with a loaded gun on the table. And Trump's finger is still on the trigger.
Is a big victory for our tech companies and our American workers here at home on this planet. And every country on the planet needs to have good trade relationships with the United States.
Even after getting what he wanted, Trump didn't ease up. He's still pushing for access to Canada's tightly controlled dairy and poultry sectors, areas protected under Canada's supply management system. And he's gone further, accusing 11 out of 13 Canadian provinces of banning American products from shelves or shutting U.S. companies out of procurement contracts. He's called these moves nasty. And though no new tariffs have been triggered yet, the threat still hangs. Behind closed doors, both U.S. and Canadian negotiators know Trump doesn't let things go. He escalates until he wins more, or until the other side walks.
In Mr. Carney's comments earlier today, he talked about this being part of a larger negotiation, but he said it was expected as part of a bigger deal. He talked about it not making sense to collect these revenues and later have to remit them, almost positioning this.
Carney, for now, is staying calm. He says negotiations are part of a broader deal and emphasizes that everything is still in progress. But behind that calm is concern. Canada has already offered a lot. Since December 2024, the Carney government has approved billions more in border security spending, supported the controversial US-led Golden Dome Missile Defense Initiative, passed Bill C-2 on border measures, and passed Bill C-5 to ease US investment in Canadian critical minerals. And now, the DST is gone, the most direct economic concession to date. What has Canada gotten in return? Not much. No tariff relief. No market access wins. No permanent guarantees. Trade expert Stuart True calls this an extremely high price to pay just to return to negotiations, with no guarantee of success. And the negotiations themselves remain secretive, giving no clarity on what else Canada might be forced to give up next. Both sides are aiming for a final deal by July 21st, less than 3 weeks away. But even with talks back on, nothing is certain. If Trump refuses to offer meaningful concessions, like tariff rollbacks or access guarantees, this apparent victory may unravel. Carney could walk away again, this time with a stronger case. Canadian Parliament might block deeper concessions, especially on agriculture. Or Canada could quietly lean more toward Europe, rebalancing its trade ties beyond Washington. Trump may have won this round, but if he overreaches, if he demands too much, offers too little, and pushes too hard, he risks losing the very deal he just got back on track. Because even the quietest partner can flip the table when pushed too far.